Now, speaking of campaigns and elections, we know that elections, especially for presidency, usually really come with a lot of promises, written documents and off-card promises. Of course, the most trending this time around is President Yoweri Museveni's promise of free vocational education and Robert Chagulanyi's promise to pay every police person 1 million shillings. So to speak to us about some of the promises in these manifestos, do they appeal to us? We have the recently elected chairperson of the National Youth Council, Jacob Eyeru, and Ms. Alana Kimbabazi, the program manager, Right to Health at the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights. This morning, ladies and gentlemen watching us this Thursday, welcome gentlemen and lady to Morning at NTV.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yes, we are delighted to have you on this morning show just to pick your thoughts on the latest manifestos. I just want to start with the lady, like they always say, ladies first. I hope that's okay with you.
That's okay.
You've probably listened to the different manifestos, NUP manifesto. You've listened to the NRM manifesto. Right. You've also listened to some of the things that John Katumba is promising this country. What are some of your thoughts on that?
So I think that to start this discussion, we need to look at the state of the nation. We cannot speak about Uganda like it has been, and I think COVID was this sort of eye-opener. We've known there's inequality, but it really exposed it. People are really struggling to get food. Some people have become wealthy from COVID. We've seen a health system that is struggling. We've known it has been struggling, but for the poor, now we have seen it struggle as a whole. We've questioned our education system and how it should function in light of this. And so I think these manifestos as a whole, we don't want more of the same. Now, we've seen people just really saying the state should have our back. We should have social protection at minimum, right? And when we look at these manifestos, we look at it that way. And I'll start with the NRM manifesto. I was joking, and my dad, who is much older, yesterday was telling me, I hope this NRM manifesto is not starting 1986, because he was that generation strong supporter. And he said, we need to know where we are now, right? And what have you done in the last 5 years? And I think the NRM manifesto, it almost seems like a policy, almost a regurgitation of policy documents. So from my perspective, from someone who is really, and an organization, maybe I'll say a bit about ISA, the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights works to advance socio-economic rights, particularly for the vulnerable. So for those of us who are looking at how does the most vulnerable person in Uganda really benefit, and how do elections enable them to have better service delivery, these manifestos still have, I think, a long way to go. The NRM manifesto, like I said, will say a lot of the things. It will say we've improved access to education, UPE. Well, you did, and now you're saying you will continue to do so, but are you addressing the issues that we're seeing there? The issues where poor students are not able to access these UPE, USC schools because of other fees that are put on. And the reason why those other fees are put on is because the amount you're giving in capitation grants is not sufficient. You have not assessed that, right?
Yes.
So that is from education. They talk about access. We will increase access. Where? I needed to know. You're the ruling party. So we need to know that you're going to target these particular areas, particularly for the most vulnerable, because of anyone else, you should have the data. When it comes to quality education, we should be able to say, okay, you're truly going to take these measures to improve quality. You're going to say increase teacher retention. Are you going to pay them better? Why haven't you paid them better? How much of this have we seen in prior years? And how are you making sure that vulnerable students, because I've seen recently the government online account was even boasting, we have reached every sub-county, and I was busy arguing with them. No, you haven't. You have not. So what is your plan for the vulnerable students? Particularly right now during COVID, we know that it is students from poor families that are just not learning. This distance learning, it's not working. And as they try to get us back into school, they're recognizing there's huge issues, like people are not able to get quality schools within their communities.
All right, well, let me just cut you short over there, and I'll get back to you, because you're speaking about the NRM manifesto, and we do have Jacob here, that recently in your campaign, you made promises to align the NRM manifesto and put in place, deal with the issues that affect young people. And of course, young people are affected by issues to do with education, with health. you've seen the manifesto. How are you working closely with it, and what do you make of it? Is it any different from the manifestos you've seen, say, in 2011 or 2016?
Thank you. First of all, I need to thank the young people of Uganda for entrusting me with the leadership for young people, but also for entrusting the NRM with that leadership. I think that the principal necessity for young people is to be ensured by the assurance that the leadership of young people is in line with what government wants to achieve, so that that negotiation for young people's problems is already cushioned by that alignment. Now, with regard to the NRM manifesto, I'd like to first request that my sister here reads that NRM manifesto, because it is principally different. It's principally different because the NRM has adopted a new economic model, which is the parish model. If she had read it, she would know. The parish model has a new approach to economic development that focuses on leveraging parish organization that is different from the initial initiatives we had taken as a country, and now centers development around conglomerates but built around parishes. For instance, the major sectors in this country that provide the highest number of employment, like the agricultural sector, is adopted in that model to say we are now looking at the 4-acre model, where we plan with each parish having 4 acres of commercial agricultural land. And that is supposed to achieve the intention of commercialization of agriculture and then build down to what young people can have, which is jobs along the chain. And I think that this is the disservice that these discussions have. If we are discussing manifestos, then we must discuss them in the reality of their existence and not in the history that we know. So with regard to young people, I feel like all the candidates in the election have, of course, made initiative to, toe the line of saying young people and their problems need to be solved, which we appreciate. But to the extent of inclusiveness of their aspirations in their manifestos, I think that the NRM has given the most robust outcome possible. For instance, with regard to jobs, the NRM manifesto focuses on the building capacity for creation of jobs and wealth, which is why the NRM manifesto envisages free vocational education, because
getting on to vocational education,
yes.
But before addressing the issues that we have already seen in the USE, have you, because most of the concerns are, okay, the NRM is promising free vocational training and education, but there are already existing issues within the UPE and USE.
Yes.
Have you dealt with those ones? Are they clearly put in the manifesto that these are some of the issues that we faced here, and moving forward, this is what we're going to do to improve? Because you may be promising something and it's going to bring more issues.
I think that the introduction of free vocational education is not to undo the problems in formal education. It is to equip the economy to absorb its challenge of unemployment. Vocational education in and of itself is the achievement of skills, regardless of your capacity with language, English language, which you might fail in formal education, regardless of your capacity with comprehension of the science subjects. Vocational education provides for what we would call the propelling effect in an economy, which is the skills that are required for cottage industry, which is family-based industries and small-scale industries. Now, for all economies that have developed world over, the biggest employer of persons is in cottage. It is in small skills and small industries. Industries that employ 5 to 10 people, farms that employ 5 to 10 people. And that is why it is critical that we put differently the achievements of the education sector itself and the necessity for vocational training as a priority. But to return to your interest, which is the failures of UPE and USE, first and foremost, the intention originally of UPE and USE was to increase access okay? Because there's a problem primarily on access to education. The increment on access is first to waive whatever it is that impedes that access, which is to say we have tuition and many people are poor, so let's remove that necessity. When you remove that necessity, then you have increased access. What the NRM achieved with that is an increased enrollment rate. In fact, at primary level, we had a gender equal enrollment rate at primary level. The next question becomes the sustainability of that access, which is a question of budgetary allocation, which I believe the NRM is working on. Why? Because education in and of itself cannot be sustained entirely as a public funded entity. We are not the country that can afford it entirely. In fact, no countries at our level of GDP and economic development can afford that entirely.
I want to take it back to Ms. Alana Kembabazi. I feel like there's a whole lot of stuff that you want to say in response to Jacob. What are some of your thoughts on his own submission supporting the NRM manifesto and saying that it is different from what we've seen in the past and there are new developments in it that are going to lead to the development of the country?
You know, I think we need to stop politicking at a certain point. You know, I think that Ugandans are tired of that. It is because they are frustrated by the same old promises that they say, well, let me as well sell my vote to the highest bidder, whoever gives me money, because every time you come in, you don't give me a proper plan and you don't actually do it, or you give a proper plan and then you don't do it because you have a lot of policies. And I started off by saying that the NRM manifesto, when you read it, it is a regurgitation of different policy documents, which means that in some ways, yes, there's a beauty in that because there is data, there is strategy, there's a lot of reference to 1986 and what we have done since then.
For the last 30 years.
For the last 30 years. But we need to know the last 5 years, you are supposed to achieve this, you've achieved that, you haven't. We need to have that assessment because elections are a cyclical process. We're not supposed to be assessing you for that. No, it's supposed to be now. You say this in the next 5 years. If you haven't delivered, go. We've seen America, Trump out. You know, that is what is supposed to be happening as an accountability mechanism. And when I get back to education, you can talk about vocational education, which is there. But education is also a human right. And we cannot forget that. Basic education is a human right. That means that every child, regardless of where their parents can pay, should be able to get a basic education. And that means when you come up with a policy, UPE, USC, which you did, which I think was great from an access perspective, you look at the gaps there, you assess that in these years we have failed and we have a proper plan. Not everyday comment or financing will work on it because Ugandans are tired. When you come to healthcare, we see the manifesto, for example, saying, and it boasts that it is putting Lubowa, super specialized, for tourism. Yet we are saying people are actually dying right now because they are having issues getting to health facilities, right? We have 39 districts without hospitals. It talks about a few districts here, a few districts here. I want you to be able to say, okay, in the island areas, for example, we have known they're the most vulnerable. We are going to do this. Yes, we have improved on access in healthcare, and these are the gaps, like a real plan, because you see you're the ruling party. Unlike others who come in with aspirate, you are the ruling party. We have seen you, so we need to know your plan for actually addressing these gaps in a way that is specific for the most vulnerable. Because you can come on and they do go ahead and they'll talk about, you know, because it's all about securing the future. Job creation, I should actually read them out here, some of the key priorities in this manifesto to sort of anchor this discussion. But as they talk about all of the things that they're going to do to secure your future, we have to think about how does the most vulnerable person you know, how do they benefit? It means that you look at things like social protection. You move beyond saying SAGE and so forth, and you say, what is a holistic mode of social protection? Like I said, there should have been an awakening with COVID. People are frustrated. They are tired. You saw it even a bit in the primaries. You see it in the demands that are being made in this election, unlike others. I've been seeing a lot of segments where people say, if our leaders are not giving us our feeder road here, or if they're not giving us health care or education, those things never necessarily came up in other elections, right? And so you have to be able to read the mood. So you're seeing a lot of these things around social protection or health or education, they're often in our policy plans. They've been in the prior National Development Plan. We have a new development plan, and we need to know what is this thing that this thing that is going to get us, you know, how are you addressing the gaps that are there? There are gaps that we know are there that no one is addressing. When you come and think about, he said, for example, that no one should be able, we can't afford to give quality public education as a basic, the basic public quality public education. And I actually disagree. I think we have the finances to do so. I think we have to address the pervasive corruption, and we have to do so by actually tackling things like illicit financial flows. If the NRM had said we are going to tackle illicit financial flows, where you know for a fact that there are different ways, both legal and illegal, that money is leaving this country through leakages, tax exemptions that are problematic. Like if it had actually gone bit by bit, instead of hearing the same sort of very similar rhetoric, that would be an issue. But what I do credit NRM for, I think, is recognizing that there should be investment in public education and public health. Because we've seen a trend, a worrying trend around privatization and saying we're going to leave it to the market. And I think that you see this balance where they are still saying we are going to do that. Well, and I want to switch to NUP, but okay.
I sort of feel that we're concentrating a lot on the NRM party, maybe because we have a representative here, but we know that we have 11 candidates, and that is actually, I want to pick your thoughts, you, Alana, and also Jack. We have 11 candidates. I think the most congested ballot paper that we're going to see come 2021, and we have the youngest presidential candidate that we've ever seen. What does this mean for both of you? Does it come off as this shows that we are living in a democratic country? What does this mean to you, Alana and Jacob? I'll start with you, Alana.
I think that, and I will at some point get into the new manifesto, because I think I also have a critique of it here and there. But looking at sort of what is there, I think, first of all, maybe the diversity in candidates shows people do really want to
take up leadership positions.
To take up leadership, but I think there's a lot of dissatisfaction in the country. I do think that at some point we are going to see this sort of converging, and the candidates will likely reduce, right? But I think it comes and stems from the fact that so many Ugandans feel left behind. They do not see themselves represented in this state that is moving towards middle income status, right? Because of things like inequality and poverty and high unemployment and lack of basics like health and education. And so there's, I think, a lot of dissatisfaction. That is one thing I would take from that. I do think that I'm yet to see from all the candidates, right, what I'd hoped to see by now, which is a real focus on people, right? And where they are. And NUP says, for example, that their theme of their manifesto is people-centered governance, and they've made some strong statements. We will pay the healthcare workers better. NRM has also said that. I think FTC say that. We will, policemen, and we will invest in education and health, which are really great. And we're seeing this, by the way, this focus on investment, health, and education is cutting across almost all the candidates. Yes. But the devil is in the details, right? And that is what I'm saying, that for a number of them whom we have not seen manifestos from, you're left to judge based off their speeches, but those are speeches. We say many things here. We need a proper plan. And I think that when ISA held a conference about 2 months ago, and a lot of what people said was we need like service delivery, things like social protection, things like actually making sure there's inclusive growth that works for all, including employment at a livable wage. You can say you're improving employment, like what NRM is saying, without a minimum wage, without thinking about a livable wage, and it still falls short. So a lot of Ugandans are saying they do need this, and I do not know that the candidates right now are giving us enough detail at this point. They are all saying that because they're reading the mood. But we need to know, like I said, and the reason why, for example, I started this discussion in NRM, like I said, it was the ruling party. And so we expect a lot more from them, right? If I could just, for example, just give a few examples on people power, or, well, let's call it NUP. NUP's manifesto, because NUP is the party now. When it comes to, for example, health, they will say, yes, we've seen these failures in health, maternal health. It's one of the, health is a huge part of their agenda, particularly maternal health, right? But somewhere in there they say, well, we also want to invest in these private not-for-profit hospitals. And then you begin to say, okay, I want to hear all the candidates, for example, say, whatever happens, we are going to make sure we have a strong public health system, because COVID showed us without a strong public health system, we're all collectively screwed. And so you do want to see them make that leap to see them say, and I do like, in some ways, for example, Noop says, we will get the money. And they say, how do we say we'll get the money? We will look at some of these wasteful expenditures. They talk about debt, negotiating with the World Bank to cancel debt or reduce the debt, which is something NRM did earlier on. And when they did that, actually, in the cancel the debt campaign in the 90s, a lot of that money was put towards health and education. In fact, the money that financed UPE, a lot of it came from payments that were saved from cancelling the debt. So there are certain issues that we are grappling with as a country that you hope to see reflected of more in these manifestos. For the independent candidates, it's tricky because, like I said again, we haven't seen their manifestos. It will be very interesting.
Wait to see.
But I think what will be useful for all Ugandans is, first of all, and I know the manifestos can be hard for most Ugandans process. Like NRM has almost 300 pages. You fall asleep, you wake up, but it has quite a bit of detail, right? Being able to have these in accessible formats for all Ugandans and having these conversations, if at minimum, an election, stimulates these conversations about how do we rebuild a country that works for all, particularly prioritizing socioeconomic rights. I think having many candidates is a wonderful thing from that perspective.
We need now to move on to Jacob, but also you who's watching us this morning, you can of course share with us your thoughts on our NTV using the morning at NTV hashtag on our social media platforms, NTV Uganda on Facebook, NTV Uganda on Twitter, on what you make of the manifestos. Is it business as usual? Is it what you already see, or do you see any difference in some of the manifestos that we have seen, for instance, from the YANT, the Alliance for National Transformation, and then NUP, and not forgetting the NRM party? I want now to pick your thoughts of you, Jacob, on the different manifestos that you have seen, on the fact that we have 11 candidates. What do you make of this? Does it show that your party has actually created a platform that allows everyone that wants to lead, take part in politics, to come forward?
Thank you. First and foremost, I would like to say very briefly that only 3 candidates have put out what would be a manifesto.
Yes.
And NUP and the NRM are the principal 2 that have released that in full. The ANT has hinted on their priority areas. So of 11, we can confidently say we do not know what the 8 are up to.
But they have about 60 days now.
Exactly. So I would like to maintain that better to discuss the 3 than preempt the 8 and then be found to fault. So the NUP and NRM principal difference is that, first of all, the NUP candidate has hinted that the contents of a manifesto are not as important as the candidature or the intention of the candidate to win. And I think that's a very bad precedent for the country, because the vote that people cast is a vote of social contract. What do we hold you accountable by and accountable to? If we do not have that clearly spelled out in a document, then we are starting politics on a wrong note. So I do not agree with that principle. The second thing that I think we need to put clearly forward is that there are things that cut across, like education, like health, and so many other things. But like she said, the devil is in the details. While the NRM is talking about access to quality education, NUP is leveraging the failures of the current challenges that the NRM faces. Of course, with common knowledge, that should be the trend, because NRM has been in power for quite a while. But the NUP manifesto, for instance, envisages addressing the dropout rate of girls and boys by providing free sanitary towels as a remedy. So in such a manifesto, I wonder how the boy child will keep in school because girls have received free sanitary towels. But even for the girl child, the correlation between that reception and addressing the entirety of the dropout rate does not materialize entirely. So that is one problem. When we talk about the biggest necessities and the biggest challenges in the country, one to include the lack of jobs for young people. The NUP's standard is one to deal with illicit tax waivers. First, the problem is in calling tax waivers illicit because they are provided for by law, so they cannot be illegal. But like she says here, there's so much money that goes out of this country that we need to address. The thing is, if we have something that we call illegal and illicit. We have not traced it. The quantifying of that amount, we do not know whether we're talking about 1 billion, 200 billion, and even what is recoverable from that amount. Like when the Panama Papers leaked and all these papers leaked, the recovery of that money has not been true for every country. So the basis of planning for a country cannot be on money that you do not see. It must be on money that you can collect, on taxable incomes, and on the achievement of the same. So I feel like some manifestos, like the Loop Manifesto, is counterproductive. If you want to create jobs, but you're not willing to have a very worthwhile investment environment by providing tax incentives that bring in investment, then for young people, you are doing a disservice.
I think that was actually part of the NUP manifesto.
Exactly, and that's what I'm saying, that it becomes a disservice to young people. When you insist that you want to work for them, the intention is good, but the approach does not result into working for them, and that's a big problem. When we talk about health, I would like to say with pride that Uganda is a model country with regard to how we have responded to COVID-19. World over, we are acclaimed for best practice examples to other people. So in terms of management of what I would call health crisis, Uganda has done really well with the pandemic, but it's not the first. We have demonstrated capacity with Ebola, and this is common knowledge. However, we appreciate the challenges of the health sector in Uganda, and there are heavily challenges of underfinancing. But if you go across the board, this is a question of prioritization. While health is a very important thing, health alone does not guarantee the performance of a country at a high level and its development. Healthy people who do not have access to jobs do not reflect back into strong livelihood and strong education sector. So what the NRM works with is a balance of necessity, and that balance of necessity must include prioritization, which is why the detail of the NRM manifesto is very important. Why are we, instead of saying 40 pages, doing 249 pages?
Because also you've
above.
been in leadership for the last 30 years, so
I also have a
one
very
would
good
say,
response to
but-
that, because
but
they
no,
put the president's
you
speeches
pretty much
a
have
lot of
so
the
much
time.
to say for the last 35 years, which you cannot say for the NUP party that is just coming on board, for the YANT that is just coming on board, for the independent candidates. I mean, you're sort of also... Yes?
Yeah, I'd like to be very clear. A manifesto is not about how long you've been in power. Therefore, you have a lot more to say. No. Manifesto is a document of research from public information. What you want to do for the country can fit in 1,000 pages. It can fit in 10,000 pages.
It can fit in 5 pages.
No, it cannot fit in
Yes,
5
it
pages
can.
unless you're an unserious candidate.
No.
But I'll give you an example of South Korea. The Undong movement that transformed South Korea into a developed nation is a document of over 700 pages and was dealing with how they would work out at the grassroots level. I think that the first level of seriousness of a presidential candidate is to be able to see the details of the country and not assume that running a country is something, like my sister says, that can fit in 5 pages, which is smaller than a concept for a conference in Serena here. So I think that we need to be honest about that. But to quickly go through the other, the ANT manifesto is better than the NUP manifesto, even in its lack of detail.
Well, maybe just to cut you short
Yes.
there, maybe the people watching us tonight, maybe you haven't gotten in touch or seen the ANT manifesto, and I just want to break it down for all of us here and also for those watching us. Briefly, in terms of governance, the ANT party is looking at installing the national language, foster conflict resolution, promote the diversity of people, strengthen the anti-corruption institutions, and also establishing the age limit that the NRM party, worked around and removed, increasing funding for local government. And in terms of the economy, the YANT is looking forward to establishing agriculture value chain management, increase agriculture budget to 10%, and also setting up the Agriculture Bank of Uganda, not forgetting developing transport infrastructure in order, at the end of it all, to boost tourism. Enhance electricity. We've seen people in Soroti in the West Nile as well saying that this is an issue that they want. No power, no vote. Enhance oil drilling. In terms of natural resources, the YANT party is looking at encouraging conservation. Do you believe the NRM party, that is a question you need to talk about, do you think it has done a lot of conserving the environment? Environmental issues are key, and I believe in the manifestos, those are some of the things that they should be bringing out. Social sector. Education is key. It's very important for the young people, for the people of Uganda. The aunt is saying that they need to ensure education for all. Is it something that is attainable, or is it business as usual? We also need to discuss that, considering you're saying the aunt manifesto is better than the NUP. Then, of course, equip and stock health facilities. The health sector has been affected immensely, especially in the COVID-19 pandemic. Reduce the brain drain of doctors. We know that about 100 doctors leave the country to look for greener pastures. Encourage music, sports, and creative arts. Provide uniform and other scholastic materials to the learners. Care for the aged and the old. Ensure health insurance of all Ugandans. I feel like the NRM party actually has promised that in one of its manifestos, but have we attained that? Not yet. Advancement of peace and security. This is pretty much what you should know in the ANT manifesto, and I just wanted to let the public know what it is about, because it hasn't been, you know, sent out as much as the other manifestos have. And I want to get back to you. You were saying the ANT manifesto is better than the NUP with this background.
Yes, I find it more realistic that the intention is met by the process. Of course, there are challenges with the ANT manifesto in intention. For example, of what necessity is it to install a national language? If you insist that there must be a national language, what purpose does it serve? Because in the same manifesto, you have an intention to celebrate diversity. We think that some of the gains that the country has made in unity will be compromised by a discussion of a national language. I think that principally, when you're looking at a national language, while the NRM is pursuing and the region is agreeing to an integration, the discussion is a discussion that is unnecessary. There are already grounds of unity in the country that do not require you to first enforce a national language for unity. But there's also no guarantee that languages enforce unity. I think Kenya having Kiswahili that does not guarantee their unity any more than Tanzania having Kiswahili guarantees their unity. So we think that that's a problem that we do not foresee. There are other things that are in the NT manifesto that, in my opinion, fall short of what exactly we are attempting to achieve. For instance, the ANT manifesto, the snippets we have seen, suggest that they want to enhance oil drilling, but they also want to build a refinery without procrastination. We think that some of these things are wishful, ideas that ride on what the NRM is already doing, and insisting on having a say in what the NRM is doing. Because, for instance, what does enhancing oil drilling mean? If oil drilling is already happening and so on.
I don't know if, Alana, I'm the only one who's confused, because I thought you said the ANT manifesto is more realistic than the NUP manifesto.
Yes, like I said, the NUP manifesto is special, in my opinion, because the things that it suggests, like I said, the intention is good, but the process does not deliver the intention. My analysis initially was on, for example, tax waivers. Two principal things that Liana also pointed out. One is removing of tax waivers that the NUP calls illegal. That is not a term we should have in a manifesto, because that's a provision by law. But then two is intending for dealing with debt by begging the World Bank to bring down the debt and then save money to bring into, say, public increment of salaries. I'd like to analyze that twofold. The first thing is that in 1984, our country had a fourfold increase in salaries, of public service, in an attempt to, salvage the situation of poverty of public servants and the increasing cost of living. The repercussions of that was that the country then lacked money in anything else and went further down into a recession. In fact, in 1985, the country had a GDP decrease of over 5%, as opposed to an increase. In the same year, we had just increased public wages. But the second problem with that approach is when you say you are increasing salaries and you mention for who, it has a repercussion on every other person that operates in public sector. The engineers will say that if the security is now at a minimum wage of 1 million, then the engineer must go up on a minimum wage. This conversation of minimum wage and particular ratings is not sustainable for an economy that is very informal. Why? Because the idea generally is that unless you have a good number of people that are on a wage bill that is formalized. The minimum wage does not have the effect you want on the economy. It instead stresses the economy further because the informal sector has not yet been formalized and it's still a strong proponent of our economics. So that's why I'm saying that the ANT in principle has a better version of vision for this country. So my discussion is largely ANT versus NRM, because I see that is where we have good discussion. The only manifesto that talks about the view of the future in terms of strategic security and economic development is the NRM manifesto. The NRM has in its 5-point program brought out achieving economic and political integration. Now, first and foremost, for whoever thinks that the NRM is only about keeping a hold of power and President Museveni, that point alone would, neglect that thought. Because in political integration, so to speak, the president of Uganda loses his entire grip on Uganda, and Uganda becomes a property of a bigger idea and a bigger people, which is the East African people. If you do not have that view of the African people and of their livelihood, the Ugandan market alone cannot provide all the jobs Uganda needs, but even the investment environment locally in terms of raising venture capital
in
and all
2016,
cannot happen.
The NRM party promised to create about 1 million jobs.
Yes.
How have we done so far?
Okay, I think that first we can look at how many industrial parks have come through since 2016. Why? Because the creation of jobs are not a public sector reserve. The private sector enabled.
Because I think if you come forward and you say you're going to promise 1 million jobs,
yes,
then at the end of the next 5 years, you should be able to say, we promised this in 2016.
Yes.
And so far, from our analysis, we've been able to create 1 million jobs or less or even more.
And these are the gaps and the nature of those jobs.
Yes.
You cannot, if you, 1 million job, I could be hiring you to be a, sort of a porter at a particular site. And how much are you earning? And then COVID hits and they say, oh, you should have saved. We want to give you money, Okay, Jacob, carry on.
Let me explain that. I love my sister's views. In Taiwan and China, most of the world's biggest producers put companies there to produce so they can sell to the world market, whether it's Apple, whether it's Sony, and so on. Why? Because the price of labor there is really cheap. And that price being really cheap enables everyone to produce at a small rate and the economy burgeons. What we are talking about is, first of all, employment, because there's the total lack of employment for many people, largely because of also the demand of jobs being very high. The population is very young, and so the people that come in cannot be met at the same rate with the investment necessary to employ all of them. So the first thing is, do we actually even have jobs, which is a creation that we think is a discussion we need to have. When you have someone earning nothing, the first instance of action is to say, let's first deal with them earning something, which is why I'm saying that from 2016 to 2021, the NRM has achieved the creation of very many industrial parks. We're talking about Matuga, we're talking about the Lianjun one, we're talking about the Mbale Industrial Park. These industrial parks are not products of omission. They are products of commission, intended policy, and achievable policy environments, which is why I'm saying that things like tax incentives.
Give us the results, though.
Exactly. So,
for the ordinary Ugandan,
is it possible for an industrial park to have industries and no jobs?
No. Let us talk about it in concrete terms for the ordinary Ugandan.
So, what is concrete terms?
Which is saying that we have created these many jobs. And again, like I keep getting back to it, the nature of these jobs. If you're going to say you're going to give a tax exemption to set up something, at minimum, what is the threshold, like what is the minimum level, how are you structuring
Alana and Jacob, just to bring us back on the drawing board.
I could respond to her first.
Okay,
I don't have a lot of things to respond to him, but I'm worried
to
derail our conversation.
On the like she said, how are we structuring the companies to ensure that
you provide
Ugandans
decent jobs? I think
the decent work, the right decent work.
Thank you. 2 policies have come through.
Yes.
The first is the Buy Uganda, Build Uganda policy, which ensures that Uganda itself is achieving from the setting up of industries that the rounding of money, that the movement of money sticks with the economy. But the second thing I'll tell her is a very plain truth, that there is a policy on employment levels in these industries, that how much of this must be Ugandan, how much cannot be Ugandan, and is permissible by law. And I think that this should be an honest discussion, because we are achieving industrialization for Ugandans. In any case, if the industries are set up in Uganda, the returns on investment, whether there is a drain of capital and so on, there is a Ugandan employed. And this is a principle I'm telling her.
All right,
you
Jacob,
cannot have a job where
thank
there
you
is none.
so much for your submissions.
Thank
and Alana, I do want to, of course, I want us to go to Ali Mivley, who is in the NUP camp, just to update us on what is happening and where they are. But Alana, when I come back to you, I would like to hear your thoughts on NUP manifesto and the ant, because we've tackled the NRM manifestos a lot. Well, good morning, Ali. How are you doing today, and what is the latest in the NUP camp?
Yes, a very good morning to you, Sandra Shinoyo. And right now we're coming to you live from Oyam district, and to be precise, we're here at Minakul as we're heading to the first venue of today's campaigns for the National Unity Platform flag bearer Robert Chagulanyi. And today, according to today's program, as stipulated by the Electoral Commission, we shall be starting from Oyam district and then move around to Apak, and we shall be completing our journey for today, the campaigns in Lira districts, where he will be having his last rally. Yesterday, following the running battles between the police and the supporters of the National Unity Platform, Robert Chagulanyi was escorted out of Gulu town, and at the moment we've been told that he actually slept around Camden Corner, where he'll be setting off and visiting several areas in search of votes that he wants people to trust him for the topmost office in the country, that's the presidency of the Republic of Uganda. And yesterday's message was all about working on improving the livelihood of the people of northern Uganda. For starters, you know, northern Uganda was affected by the LRA, and there were major concerns from the residents, whereby even after a decade after the insurgency over the LRA, people are still facing several challenges, and a key of these was the poor road network. I witnessed that myself in Padel district, where the roads were kind of poor. If you compare Padel district and Gulu, because Gulu has a better road network. For sure, if you look at the roads in Gulu district, they're actually very, very good. But if you look at Padel, that was a major concern there. And also, the mothers in northern Uganda also had a concern of increasing maternal mortality, which they say if they are to vote for any presidential candidate, then that means they need to, that presidential candidate needs to look into that issue of improving their health. So as to reducing the number of mothers that die daily. But again, as I earlier told you, we're moving to Oyam district, in which we've already reached here, but the actual venue, that's where we're heading to, and we're going to be linking up with the team so as to see the key message for today and how it will go. Yesterday it was running battles in Gulu district, police and the supporters of the National Unity Platform, and let's hope that maybe today the Lango sub-region will be more peaceful and the issue is solved. But again, Sandra, just hinting on the issue of processions, because remember the Electoral Commission said no processions, but yesterday I told you it's very difficult to control these processions. Right now you can see some of the people, the camera can't zoom where they are, but you can actually see some people already waiting for the presidential candidate. So what does it mean? How is the police going to handle this? And the threat of COVID-19, we're yet to tell.
All right, thank you so much, Ali. I am just curious to find out what Bobby Wine is promising the people of Oyam, considering you're in that area, or even yesterday, on working on improving the livelihood of the people there. What are some of his key priorities, or how is he trying to say that he's going to address some of these issues? Poor road network and maternal mortality.
Sure, I'll put those questions to him.
Questions to him today. Yesterday, did he mention anything about, I know he talked about ensuring that every single sub-county has a maternal ward or a hospital. What are those are the key things that I would like to hear from you for a person that is on ground. In regards to the health of the mothers, what is he saying?
Yes, apparently I'll pose those questions to Robert Chagulanyi to answer those questions, because yesterday the key issue, as I've told you, the mothers were so worried about their health and the maternal mortality rate being high in those districts. And actually, they told the few that I spoke to, they told me that they have to move from their district, Padel, and then go to other districts like Gulu and the neighboring districts. That's where they can access improved health services, which is still a challenge to that district. But for Oyam, we have to find out their unique challenges there.
All right, thank you so much, Ali Mivle, for joining us today on Morning at NTV. We'll be in touch just to see what happens later. Hopefully there are no running battles today. All right, we'll now go back to our panelists. Alana and Jacob, you are having very interesting conversations here. Just to pick your thoughts, Ali is in the NUP camp, and already they're talking about maternal mortality, and those are some of the issues that we are talking about. What are some of your thoughts on the NUP manifesto in regards to that?
I think it's, first of all, like I said, it made it a central tenet of one of its principles, and I always say the devil in the details. He talked about we are a model for COVID handling, but a lot of mothers died just getting to facilities as we were struggling to combat COVID. And this came from the fact that facilities are far, his lack of emergency care, and like being able to get an ambulance and be stabilized in time and all of that, right? And so when you come to the NUP manifesto, you do want to see a concrete plan around that. They talk about increasing financing, and they set it according to these targets. Abuja, a couple of targets that we have all signed and always talked about and never done, and they say they are going to do so. They talk about national health insurance, again, discussions that have been happening for a long time. I don't know that they explicitly say they will focus on the public, and for me that is very critical, because I think about the mothers the reporter we just were talking about the need for public health facilities, right? That is why you find they're crossing districts if necessary, because they don't necessarily have the money to be able to afford private. And so being able to make sure that you have strong public health facilities so the poorest mother is able to get, like, not die while giving life, I think is very, very important. And this is a huge issue in Uganda. We always said a matatu full of women die every day while trying to give birth, which is a tragedy in of itself. Some of the other things they do talk about with regard to health are scrapping prohibitive fees, where public institutions are already funded by the taxpayers, but they're focusing, I think, on like birth certificate fees, so I didn't quite understand that part of it. But they do talk about universal health coverage, which I think is a key thing. This is an area where I really wanted a bit more detail. I would have really loved to see a bit more detail, because there's a lot of focus on how we're going to move forward with the health sector.
All right.
And there's a focus on public-private partnerships and some of that. And I don't think they addressed those. And I think that some of those financing modalities and that skew towards private can have a very disproportionate effect on their base, which are poor people. Because I think they could have gone a step further in addressing. Everyone will say we want health care, but how you're financing it, is it, and how the government is regulating and playing its stewardship role to make sure that the poor mother is not detrimentally affected and failing to access
We'll
health
stay
care.
with the
So
NUP. Yesterday, Bobby Wine said that they're working towards creating 5 million jobs.
Okay.
And that is a difference of the 1 million jobs that the NRM party that Jacob comes from had promised in 2016. Is 5 million jobs attainable, or are we also just lying to Ugandans to excite them?
Sometimes people are focusing on the number of jobs a lot of the time and saying this is the target. I do think that we've seen, and I like, in the NRM manifesto, and I want to just go back a bit because they give a bit of the history from like the way back, from like the start of the state, and sort of what the focus of the state was, which was really on a huge focus on public services when we had just started, on creating jobs, right? And on people like my father's generation knowing that once you finish school, there will be a job for you, which a lot of Ugandans do not see. So I do see the temptation for everyone to throw numbers about jobs. And we can get into sort of the feasibility and the calculation and all of that. But like I keep getting back to all of you, for me, I'm interested in the quality of the jobs as well, because I think that we have to avoid a mentality where we just, just everyone get a job, and people are not able to live in dignity. And so that is where I'm coming from. But I also do think that, again, that's when you really have to think about sort of the financing, one, in terms of increasing the resource envelope, but two, in curbing wasteful expenditure, and three, in the environment you are going to be creating. But finally, when it comes to the issue of jobs, you know, human capital and skills development is very critical. So how you are ensuring, because this is, again, 5 years, how you're fixing those gaps in the education system is really critical. And I do think that their plan around education is great. It's, of course, critiquing a lot of the failures of the current government's plan on education, but I do think that at least they are articulating and saying, we want to see, you know, sort of a quality public education come up in so many ways. And at the tertiary level, and in terms of skills training and all of that, you know, there are certain things where, like I said, I would want to see a bit more detail. But getting back to the people who are saying these complaints and want to see, what I will say that NUP has done well is reflect the concerns of the people. Because, like I said, people are tired. Whether it is a security office, whether it is a security officers or policemen who have been living in dismal
and also
conditions,
promising them 1 million shillings, the lowest that should earn
it's
about
beyond
1 million shillings.
It's also like the quality of their housing.
Alana and Jacob,
I haven't responded to Joseph.
I am going to cut you short for a moment and take us to Entebbe, where our correspondent Ivan Walinyoro is speaking to the fishermen at Kasenyi on what they expect from their aspirants. Over to you, Ivan. Good morning, and what is the latest? Ivan, good morning. What is the latest in Entebbe? What do the people of Kasenyi want?
Kasenyi landing site, and the Kasenyi landing site is one of the biggest landing sites that we have in a country, employing over 3,000 people, of course, doing the fish business. But apparently, you've been how the trend has been for the fishing community when they have been brutalized through torture, among all other those related. Some of them have lost their lives, some of them are still sick. But we want to understand, when we get to campaigns in such a period, what do the fishermen expect to listen from the aspirants? Which message do they have to listen from the aspirants? It's a fresh morning here in Kasenyi, and every fisherman has come out to look for means of survival. If my camera person can show you in the back, that's the biggest landing site we have among those, of course, in the country, and doing different fish business. It's a hub for fish, whether fried, whether fresh, or anything in that direction. But of course, I want to seek a voice from these people. What do they have? What do they expect the aspirants to talk about when they win their vote in the area? Mukuru nkwaniriza ku morning at NTV.
Nze amanya gange mpitibwa Mubiru Isima.
Yes, Mubiru Isima.
Ansinzidde wano Kasenyi.
Yes, sebo. Oye yesimbyewo. Kiki kye mwagala abeere ng'ateeka keesira bw'aba wakujja nga awenja akalulu mu bitundu by'e Kasenyi?
Ekisookera ddala bw'abazze eno mu kitundu kyaffe twetaaga atuyambeko ffe nga abavubi abaalina kapito waffe amala, abaalina amaato gaffe gonna gasaanyiziddwawo, ate nga mu kusaanyizibwamu abantu ab'olubatu be bakifunamu. Naffe tubale tusaba gavumenti oba omukulembeze yenna yenna ajja oba tusazeewo kwekolamu bibiina asobole okutuyambira awo, agambe nti gurupu bweti njiwadde entandikwa bweti, tusobole tuleme kulemererwa, kubanga omuvubi ye muntu asobola okukuumika ate ye muntu atasobola kukuumika atya. Kiringa omuntu nga muyala tosobola mukuumira mu nnyumba, asobola okuvaayo okukola ekintu kyonna okulabika ng'afuna ekyokukola ki ekyokulya.
Ng'abavubi muzze mukubibwa ne mukwatibwa, amato gammwe bagokyeza, naye akaseera ak'okusalawo mu kulonda. Kiki kye mutunuulidde oyo omuntu agenda okujja ng'asaba kalulu nti ekisanja kino ekiddako namwe mulina otunuulirwamu?
Nga bwe bagamba gavumenti yali erina ekiteeso kyereese nti oba tusobola okuwumulamuko emyezi 3 mu mwaka, batute emyezi egiddako tukole ki? Tukole nga Tanzania bw'ekikola. Naffe kintu kyekimu kye tuba tukola ki? Kye tusaba. Naye tuli bubi nnyo, twalekebwa emabega gavumenti. Omuntu n'ogera n'oleeta ebyennyanja n'oleeta kiro kale nga 2, gavumenti ne bakulaga nti ogulibwa siringi 670, naye ng'ate eri waggulu ekyennyanja kibako ki? ku bbeeyi ne buno bwenyininyini obutimba buno bwolaba batukubira emiggo bwenyininyini gavumenti ebufunako omusolo so lwaki singa egamba nti oba tebukifunamu lwaki tebuziyiza ddala kukola ki kujja ereeta ne batuguza ate mu kutuguza benyininyini abali mu buyinza ate bebabituguza bamala okubituguza ate ne batukwata
muze mulajjana nti abasirikale babakuba emigo nti nabo kati bayingira mu kuvuba nabo bennyini bavuba eddoboozi lyamwe mwe mulowooza libadde lituuka gye mubadde mwagala lituuke
eddoboozi lyaffe terisobola tuuka lwa nsonga omuntu bw'aba alina omugaati gwalya tasobola kukkiriza gwe ogutuukeko wabula tulina kuyambibwa mukulembeze yenna anaabazze oba President Museveni yazzeeko atuyambe oba Bobi Wine yazzeeko atuyambe oba ani anasobola okujja atuyambe naffe tufiibweko ng'abantu naye tulekeddwa nnyo emabega tukubwa ennyanja efuuse y'abantu balubatu ne bw'ogenda bw'oti eri ewasaidi eri owa Gilbert kati balinga abasalamu poloti buli omu alundirayo ebyennyanja tokkirizibwa kuvubaayo naye ng'ennyanja yaffenna nga bannayuganda tusaana tugiganyulwemu era omukulembeze yenna ajja atunule mu kintu ekyo alabe embeera gye tulimu ngaffe abavubi kino bwe njogera ku bavubi soogera ku muvubi wa Kasenyi yeka njogera ku muvubi yenna yena munnayuganda avubira ku Lake Victoria ku Nairo buli wamu kati bwogerageranyanga mu mazzi amawanvu eyo Batanzania batera okujja mu mazzi eyo kati nga Nkose wa Mukalangala eyo ne bavuba naate ffe munnayuganda okuva eno weyongereko mu mazzi g'eri ewaabwe ofuna miggo
oyo y'omuku bavubi wane Kasenyi naye nga bw'obanga ogezezaako okuwumbawumba ebintu byabadde ayogerako nti omukulembeze anajja ino mu kitundu ky'e Kasenyi ajja kubeera ng'ekisooka ayogere ku ngeri abavubi bano gye balina okubeera nti nabo basigala mu mulimu gwabwe agasseeko ntino abaali balwanyisa envuba embi nabo ate kati batandise okwenyigira mu kuvuba ekintu ekigenda nga kiba sindiikiriza okubeera nti omulimo guno baguvaamu naye kyayogerako n'abamu ku bavubi wano mu bitundu by'e Kasenyi mukulu nkwaniriza ku Morning at NTV sebo twagala mwe ng'abavubi oyo yeesimbyeyo bw'anaaba nga azze mu kitundu ky'e Kasenyi bintu ki bye mwagala asinge okuteekako essira bw'abanga wakuwangula akalulu kamu
bw'anaaba nga akeetaaga ng'era nga abavubi bajjamu akalulu naye ng'atunuulidde ensonga abavubi atunuulire nnyo mufunampola ku nnyanja wano ayisiddwa bubi nnyo naddala ku sayidi y'abavubuka omuvubuka envuba gy'asinga okutegeera ku nnyanja wano naddala ku myalo gy'e Kasenyi oba olubalama lwonna emyalo egisinga obungi nvuba y'amalobo okulwanyisa envuba embi bwe kwatuuka ku muvubuka avuba amalobo oyo yaviiramu ddala ate ng'omuvubuka oyo ow'amalobo yali mu myaka gya muvubuka avuba booda emyaka egyo emizibu kaakati egiriwo kaakati ku mulembe guno naye bali bubi nnyo
naye mwe nga abavubi muze muyisibwa bubi ne mukubibwa amato gammwe ne bagokya eddoboozi mubadde mugezezaako oliweereza eri ab'obuyinza mulowooza libadde lituuka nga bano bajja okubasaba akalulu kiki ekyo kye mwagala kati nti kye baba batandikirako olwo babawangula emitima okuwaayo obululu bwammwe
eddoboozi ly'omuvubi erituuka eri abakulembeze ly'eddoboozi ly'abagagga ab'obutimba ab'essente empitirivu naye eri ono omuvubuka avuba amalobo ow'essente ntono bano bansobola kunoonya miliyoni 3 ntandika okuvuba terituuka.
Well, that was Ivan Walinyodo coming to us live from Kasenyi, where the fishermen are voicing their needs and the things they want to see their aspirants really address, and their vote will only count for those that will seek to address the issues that are affecting them there. Well, back to our panelist that is boiling over here. I just want to hear your thoughts in just a brief on the Uganda that you would want to see come 2021. Starting with you, Jacob.
Thank you. When we went for the field team, I had agreed with her that the NUP manifesto envisages what Ugandans want. Unfortunately, it is not the role of a manifesto to only do that. It is also the role of a manifesto to provide for how we will reach there, which I have pointed out to be a total failure in their manifesto. The Uganda that we want, when you wake up anyone, is one with quality education, quality of care, a well-built road network, and availability of jobs. The conversation for presidential candidates and for any political party that wants to take us there is a conversation of how, not what do we want. And that for me is the eking in the NUP manifesto. So I think that there's a general consensus.
Moving forward to the Uganda that you would want to see.
Exactly. The general consensus in the Uganda that I want to see, as chairperson of the National Youth Council, I want a Uganda that puts young leadership at the helm of national development. Because we have a burgeoning number of young people.
I think when you say that, that would ideally mean that the current president is not doing that. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying that. I am saying that young leadership in terms of the things that we need to achieve as an economy. In terms of business, I want to see more young people inspired to do business because business anywhere in the world has offered more jobs than public sector ever will in eternity. So I think that those are the things that we want to see. I want to close with the necessity of what we are doing as a country in 5 years. In the next 5 years, the country's conversation cannot be about which problems we have, because these are problems that are across the board in all developing countries and third world countries. And I insist on that because to neglect them to only Uganda is not to be visionary and not to understand how international economics and dynamics play out. If Uganda's problems in the economy are the same as Ghana's, where they change presidents every now and then, they're the same as Kenya's, where they have a port, they're the same as Nigeria's, where they have oil being drilled, then the concern cannot be a question of only Uganda. We must analyze surgically what the necessary interventions are and address them, which is what are you doing for the agricultural sector? What are you doing to improve job availability in the service sector? What are you doing for easier access to education, and that education being sustainably good and competitive world over?
We do hope you get to see that Uganda that you want. Over to you, Alana. What Uganda would you love to see?
And I started off this discussion by saying that we need to look at the state of the nation. And I think Ugandans want a changed nation. I said it in May when we came here for the State of the Nation address, to say that a country that works for them, a country where there is inclusive growth, a country where you feel, I am Ugandan because the state works for me, it is safeguarding my rights, and there is human dignity. And I think service delivery has come through very strongly. And I hope that as voters are out there, they're thinking about the extent to which you are you make sure you're not prioritizing short-term patronage over long-term service delivery. And this means that you have to look at, first of all, how they diagnose the problem. It's not enough to say we'll just give healthcare and education. Will it go to the most vulnerable? Will they invest in strong public services, because those reach the poorest and those are the hard to reach? And when you come into things like resources and so forth, are you making sure that the burden of financing this is not again left to the poorest through things like value-added tax, but it's actually targeting the illicit financial flows that go throughout this country? And finally, as we grapple with issues that all countries are grappling with, like the role of the private sector, making sure that the state is regulating the private sector when it comes to issues of service delivery, making sure that we are all moving towards a Uganda that will work for all. And so I'm yet to see this fully with all the manifestos, but I do think some go a longer way. And we've had very interesting debates and we'll continue to have them. But I just call upon all citizens to actually demand. I love the views you are showing of the different candidates saying what they want. You know, for example, the mothers saying, we're tired of losing. All right,
thank you so much, Alana and Jacob, for joining us today on Morning at NTV. And thank you too as well for being part of these conversations. We continue to have them on our social media platforms, so you can continue sending us your thoughts on that and so much more. As we come to the end, I just want to be able to tell you the meaning of our riddle this morning. It was, we asked you to share with us what it was, but I will just give you the answer. But this is what it is: what begins but has no end, and is the ending of all that begins. And the answer is death. So that brings us to the end of Morning at NTV. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Sandra Twinobdio, and we wish you an amazing day today.